They found Joe's house, not a decoy address, her real front lawn, where her children sleep. She had to fire her weapon to survive the night, and that only happens one way. Someone inside the CIA handed them her location. Now, Episode 3 carries a title that should stop every fan cold. The bearer is infected. Because what if the bear was never Russia? What if the infection is already inside the room Joe is supposed to trust with her life? And it has been there from the very beginning? There are moments in television that stop you cold. Moments where something happens on screen so raw and unexpected that you forget, for just a second, that you are watching a show. Lioness Season 3, Episode 2 delivered one of those moments. And it did not happen in some classified operations center. It did not happen on foreign soil or inside an enemy compound. It happened at home. Joe's home. For 2 full seasons, this woman has walked into the most dangerous corners of the world without breaking stride. She has run agents through impossible missions, operated in environments where one wrong step means death, and looked some of the most powerful and lethal people on Earth directly in the eye. She is built for that world. She was trained for that world. But nothing in 2 seasons of warfare, covert operations, and near-death moments prepared her, or us, for what Episode 2 showed us. Armed men appeared on her front lawn. Not surveillance, not a distant threat. Armed men arriving with intent at the one address in Joe's life that was supposed to be outside all of this. The place she goes to be a mother. The place her children live. And Joe did what Joe always does. She survived. But the price this time is different from anything she has paid before. Because surviving meant opening fire on men who somehow possessed the most classified piece of information in her entire file, where she actually lives. And that single fact is what detonates every assumption going into Episode 3. How did they find her? This is not the kind of thing that happens by accident. CIA operatives at Joe's level do not have their residential addresses floating around in accessible files. That information sits behind layers of security clearance, classified housing protocols, and operational compartmentalization so tight that even colleagues with high clearance would not automatically know it. For that address, to end up in the hands of people willing to come for her at night, in force, with weapons, it had to be given to them deliberately. Someone made a choice. Someone opened a file, or made a call, or sent a communication, and handed Joe's family home to people who wanted her dead. The moment the CIA begins processing this reality, the atmosphere inside Langley fractures, because the investigation can no longer point outward alone. The question folds inward, and it turns cold and precise. Who inside their own organization sold Joe out? That question does not just threaten Joe's physical safety. It corrodes the foundation of everything. Every colleague becomes a possibility. Every briefing becomes a potential vector. Every piece of intelligence shared within the organization carries a new and terrifying uncertainty. Did this information stay inside, or was it already on its way out the moment it was delivered? Meanwhile, Joe's family is not home. They are inside a safe house, under protection, displaced from their lives by a threat they never agreed to face. Consider what that means for someone like Joe, a woman who has spent years maintaining a brutal separation between her mission world and her home world, carrying the weight of that double existence because it was the only way to protect the people she loves from what she does for a living. That wall just collapsed. The 2 worlds she kept apart have now collided so violently that her children are sleeping in a government-secured location instead of their own beds. That is not a mission complication. That is a fundamental fracture in the life Joe has been fighting to preserve. Caitlyn is now running a race with no clean finish line. She needs to find the mole, if there is one, before they can do more damage. She needs to keep Joe operational and focused at a moment when Joe is carrying a kind of personal devastation that most people would need months to process. And she has to do all of this inside an institution where she cannot yet be certain who she is actually speaking to when she speaks to people she thought she knew. That is an almost impossible position, and Caitlyn has always been the character who finds a way through impossible positions. But episode 3 may be the first time even she does not immediately see a clear path. Season 3 has been constructing something deliberately. Every episode has added another piece to a larger architecture, building toward a collapse that is not external, but internal. Not a foreign strike against the CIA, but a hollowing from within. Episode 2 was the last episode where anyone in this story could pretend the system was still intact and functioning the way it should, because the system just allowed armed men to arrive at Joe's home. That is not a system under pressure. That is a system that has been compromised at a level deep enough to be operational. And that means episode 3 is not just the next chapter of this season's story. It is the episode where the real shape of everything begins to emerge. And based on the title alone, what is emerging may be worse than anything Joe has faced across 2 seasons of the most dangerous work on television. Most people read episode titles and keep moving. They treat them as labels, simple signposts pointing vaguely toward whatever the episode covers. But Taylor Sheridan does not write titles carelessly. He writes them the way a good intelligence officer writes a classified cable, with precision, with layers, and with the understanding that the most important information is sometimes hiding right there in plain sight, behind language that looks straightforward until you slow down and actually read it. The title of episode 3 is not straightforward. The bearer is infected. 3 words sitting at the top of every listing for this episode, visible to every fan who glanced at the schedule. And yet the full weight of what those 3 words might actually be communicating has barely been touched by most viewers. Start with the bear. In intelligence culture, in the shorthand of geopolitics, in decades of spy fiction and real-world diplomatic language, the bear is a recognized symbol. It almost always points in one direction: Russia, or broadly, a massive foreign power moving in shadow. The CIA versus the bear is one of the oldest frameworks in American intelligence history. So when this title surfaces, the instinctive reading is that some Russian asset or foreign network has been compromised, and the team is going to have to navigate that threat. That is the obvious reading. And in Taylor Sheridan's world, the obvious reading is almost always the trap. Think about the phrase from a structural standpoint. Not, the enemy is infected. Not, the network is infected. The bearer. A bearer is not a target and not an enemy. A bearer is someone who carries something. A courier. A messenger. Someone trusted specifically because they are holding something valuable and moving it from one place to another without being the destination themselves. In an intelligence context, a bearer could be the person transporting classified intelligence, the operative moving assets between networks, or, and this is the possibility that reframes the entire season, the person at the operational center of everything, the one everything flows through, the one everyone depends on, without fully understanding how dependent they actually are. Joe is the bearer. She is the operative around whom Season 3's entire mission architecture revolves. She is the one being positioned, directed, moved. If the bearer is infected, one possible reading is that Joe herself has been compromised without her knowledge, fed false intelligence, deliberately misdirected, weaponized as a carrier of consequences that serve an agenda she was never told about. Under this reading, it is possible that everything she believes she has been accomplishing, every mission, every risk, every personal sacrifice, has been feeding a plan authored by someone else entirely. She would not be a soldier fighting a war. She would be a piece being moved across a board by a hand she cannot see. But there is a second reading, and this one points directly at Langley itself. Consider the operational pattern across these early Season 3 episodes. Joe's team keeps running into unexpected resistance, as though the opposition has advance information. Traps appear that should not be possible without inside knowledge of the operation's structure. And then, most damningly, Joe's home address, arguably the single most protected piece of personal information in her entire classified profile, ends up in the hands of foreign attackers who show up armed and ready. That is not the fingerprint of isolated intelligence failures. That is the profile of an active, ongoing leak from somewhere with real access. Someone is moving information out. The question has always been who. But the more important question, as Episode 3 approaches, is how high it goes. This is where Byron Westfield becomes one of the most significant figures to watch. A high-ranking official embedded in the chain of command that shapes Joe's operational environment. If someone at that level has been compromised, then the infection does not run through one division or one analyst's desk. It runs through the decision-making structure itself. It means the directives Joe has been operating under have been filtered, at least in part, through someone whose actual loyalty was never to the mission or to the country they were supposed to represent. This is possible, and if it is true, it means the infection is not at the edges of the CIA. It is at the center. Taylor Sheridan has returned to this theme across his entire body of work. His storytelling consistently finds its most devastating drama not in external threats, but in the rot already existing inside the institutions his characters are embedded in. In Yellowstone, the danger to the Dutton Ranch was never just the developers or opposing forces. It was the corruption already running through the legal and political systems that should have provided protection. Lioness appears to be taking that same instinct and running it through the most classified institution in American government. And the implications of that, if the title of Episode 3 is genuinely telegraphing what we think it might be, are enormous. If Joe uncovers something in Episode 3, a digital footprint in a system that should be clean, a cipher communicating in a direction it has no operational reason to travel, a link between someone at Langley and something that should never have left the building, then the nature of this season changes completely. The mission is no longer about foreign threats. It becomes about survival against the command structure Joe has given everything to serve. And that is an entirely different kind of warfare, because you can plan against a foreign enemy. You can build strategies around opposition you can name and locate. But you cannot easily plan around betrayal from inside your own organization, especially when you do not yet know how far the betrayal extends, or who else might already know and be choosing silence. The moment Joe and Caitlyn genuinely understand what the bearer is infected means for their operational reality, they face the most consequential decision of their careers. Continuing inside the system means operating blind, trusting a chain of command that may be actively working against them, and risking being neutralized quietly by the very people they report to. Going rogue means losing every institutional protection, every sanctioned resource, every legal cover that being a CIA operative provides. It means becoming something the organization views as a threat to be eliminated rather than an asset to be supported. In most intelligence stories, going rogue is a dramatic last resort that characters circle around but rarely actually execute. In a Taylor Sheridan story, it is entirely possible that going rogue is not a dramatic choice, but an inevitable conclusion, because sometimes the system has already made the decision for you, long before you realize it. The hidden detail in Episode 3's title was not buried in a background frame or whispered in a throwaway line of dialogue. It has been sitting at the top of every promotional listing since the episode was announced, completely visible to anyone who looked. Most people looked and did not read it. The bearer is infected. If that bearer turns out to be the CIA itself, the system, the leadership, the institution Joe has bled for across her entire career, then what is coming in Episode 3 is not just another chapter in a spy drama. It is the episode where Joe discovers she has been fighting the wrong war all along.